Well, good morning. How is it? You guys know that song that was just played? Jimi Hendrix, right? Jimi Hendrix grew up in Seattle. You probably knew that too. But that song was actually written by Bob Dylan. Did you know that? It's a pleasure to be here. It's always a pleasure to be here. You know, I have so much inside of me that I want to share with all of you that it's sometimes difficult to figure out what to say. Okay? We have such a tremendous treasure chest full of things that speak of our history and our difference and how we stand out against a background that has not always been so receptive to the idea that nutrition plays a key role in health protection and disease prevention. And what I want to do today, though, is I want to take you through that, but I'm not going to take you, the pictures you'll see on the screen are going to be similar to ones you've seen me present before. But I want to not just talk about what they are, but what that means. There's a difference there, okay? What it means to us, what it means to the people that we talk to, and what it means to the future of health in this country and around the world. Because what this adds up to is a powerful tool that can actually have an impact on the millions, hundreds of millions, billions of people out there that are exposed, that are not only uninvolved, but they are disempowered. They don't know how to connect, and when they try to, they don't know how to make it work. And that's where you guys come in. You are the amplifiers of the SAB's message. You are the voice of us. The SAB rarely talks to the general population. We go around and do team meetings and so on and so forth. But really, it's about what you do day to day, about what you tell people, about how you introduce yourself and what you represent to them and what it represents for them. So let's take a little look as we go through this now. First of all, okay. I didn't try this out, so you got to forgive me. It's not probably that one, and it's not probably that one. It's that one. There we go. It'd be the green arrow that says, push me. Sometimes, you know, technology gets a little too simple. Anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a story. We're going to go back through sort of 60 years of excellence, tell you a little story. It's a Neolife story. It can only be told by Neolife. There's no other company out there that can tell this story. There's a lot of companies that would like to, but there's no other company that can, and I think that in itself says a lot. So let's start. You've seen this slide before. It talks about the heritage of the company, the genesis point of the idea of Neolife. It happened back in 1958, and there was a lot of scientific evidence and data behind arriving at this point, which is important unto itself. But I think the key here is, what does this represent? Well, from the perspective we have today, we know that whole food ingredients are critical to how our bodies work, how they perform, and how they function, their durability, their ability to resist disease, their ability to be strong and vigorous, to renew and regenerate for decade after decade. Against today's landscape of knowledge, it would be pretty easy to talk about the importance of whole grain nutrients and the roles they play in cells, not only the structure of cells in the membranes, but the function of cells and how those membranes work, because we know all that now. But back in 1958, this was revolutionary. Revolutionary in the fact that for the first time ever, 60 years ago, we were focusing on this idea of looking to nature's blueprint for human nutrition to find ways to solve health challenges. 60 years ago. 60 years ago, it wasn't a very receptive audience. Yet for that entire 60 years, we never lost sight of that fundamental concept. We never deviated from that path, that what it is we need to stay healthy and vigorous, to sustain ourselves throughout our lives, is right there. We just have to take the time to pursue that knowledge. We have to take the time to stay the course and never give up on the idea, because in the end, it's fundamental. Of course, how and what you give your body is going to determine how it serves you. Of course, it can't be any other way. That's not science, that's basic logic. Okay? But in 1958, it wasn't all that well received. So we started out with that, though, the first company ever to take that approach, and the only company that has stayed that course for 60 years. Okay? You know, along the path, Dr. Arthur First joined our organization. Okay? Really powerful guy. I'm not going to take you through his history. There's a lot of, I could spend days talking about him and barely cover it. But it was important for what it represented. It's not what happened. He joined and so on and so forth. It's important for what it represented. It represented that one of the great minds of the last century, okay, really, truly one of the great minds, who had devoted himself to the idea of understanding how things interact with the human body, how diseases are generated and how they are corrected, how cancers start, how they are stopped, and how to treat them when they occur. One of the great minds came up through the academic organization, ended up starting the cancer chemotherapy lab at Stanford University, developing the concepts of chemotherapy, helping hundreds of millions of people around the world, beginning to understand the relationships of what it is. What is cancer? What's it about? How does it happen? But at a point, he arrived at the idea that, you know, it's really good that I spend all this time and energy and have devoted my life to the prevention of cancer, the treatment of cancer, rather. But really, as good as the treatments are, the best case scenario would be to prevent it from happening in the first place. And what he had learned is that there are things that are naturally present in our bodies that empower our bodies to be anti-cancer agents in their own right. There are things called natural killer cells that are our first line of defense against cancer. Everybody in this room has had a cancer cell in their body at some point. Okay. If your immune system is healthy and vigorous, it went up there and said, okay, goodbye, boink. You know, and just took care of it. But Dr. First knew that. But what that means, what it represents is here's one of the great minds of this century that chose to do this, and he embraced us. Okay? He embraced the neo-life ideal. He embraced the idea that what we need is right there before us. We just need to spend the time researching and investigating and doing the science. Don't lose track of the idea that you need to create something over here in a laboratory that's, you know, a funny little chemical that does this or that or the other thing. That's called pharmacy. Okay, that's not nutrition. And don't fall into the trap of the nutrient of the year. Just because somebody's saying that you need a lot of germanium doesn't mean that you actually need any of it. Or that somebody says that something like ephedra is going to cause you to lose weight doesn't mean it's good for you. The flu will cause you to lose weight. Okay? But so what it represents, him coming on board, is certainly that really set the stage for science that is unmatched in our industry. And I'd expand that industry to include the greater, not just in network marketing, but the greater nutritional supplement industry, the whole category. It's this great mind chose to embrace us and our path. That in itself is more compelling to me than all of the things that he did, because he could have gone anywhere, done anything. He could have got funding from Wall Street to start something, but he never did. He just embraced what we were about. Now, you know, along the way, that idea got so instilled that the company decided that they were going to turn over the product destiny to Dr. First and the Scientific Advisory Board. So the Scientific Advisory Board was formed, which is a great thing, because nowhere else, there weren't any other companies with scientific advisory boards. You know, nowadays they will tell you they've got something like that, because they almost have to in order to appear like they're competing with us. But nobody had anything like that at that time. We're talking the middle 1970s here. But what it represents is a commitment at the corporate level that you don't see in the rest of our industry. What I said, the company turned the product destiny, its product destiny, over to a science group. Now, the significance of that is scientists are not always maybe as market sensitive as some might like you to be. We tend to follow the evidence, and we get excited about what the evidence tells us, not what some guy on the internet is postulating or what some crazy person who had a well in backwater Ohio said he could get from his water. You remember Willard's water? You know, there's a lot of that stuff going on out there. But in turning the product destiny over to a group of scientists, it meant that the SAB said no an awful lot, okay? Because the market was trying to get us to say yes, but we would say no. And the credibility of that is that never, ever in that process did Jerry or the rest of the group, the rest of the team there, or here and around the world, ever say, well, we don't care what the science says, we want this product. They never, ever did that. They never, ever tried to force our hand. They went with what we gave them and believed what we gave them because we promised that it was going to be a better future. We promised that this was the path, that we should not stray from it. We continue to make that promise today. Again, unlike any other company out there. It's a Neolife story, and it can only be told about Neolife. So that brought us a lot of things. You know, you've heard me talk about some of these developments, protein instantizing and artificial stomachs and glycemic response control and molecular differentiation. These are all wonderful technologies, wonderful technologies. What they represent is years, if not decades, of research to get to that point. But consider this sort of idea. We developed protein instantizing way, way back in the 1960s, okay, because powdered protein doesn't really go into water very well, and it doesn't really taste that good, and it's really not that bioavailable if you don't know how to take care of it, if you don't know how to put it together, keep the moisture away, keep the heat away, keep even the light away. That has to be made in places where there's very little exposure to what we call ambient noise. So we developed that technology way back there and began taking it further. It started with instantizing and has gone on to allow us to develop products that deliver all 22 amino acids in numbers that we can tell you on a per serving basis that no one else can match. Simply because we have such a depth of understanding of protein and how to manufacture it and how to deliver it, that unless you were there in our laboratories doing that work, you have no idea. And if you were in our laboratories doing that work and you left, we have this little light that we flash on you when you go out the door, you know, the Men in Black light, and they forget everything that they learned in the lab. Now, seriously, but things happened. Okay, so protein instantizing started way back in the 60s. In the 80s and 90s, other companies started to copy what we had done in the 60s and 70s, but by then we had moved on, okay? And by the time they got to the 80s and 90s, they were copying stuff we were doing there. We were up here today, and really what you see in the protein market today is a reflection of what we were doing 15 years ago. Talk about the artificial stomach for a moment. We came up with this idea that you really ought to pay attention to what happens to a product when you put it in your stomach if you want to understand whether it's going to be beneficial. Pretty basic idea, right? You want to know what it's going to do. Hard to do that in living people because you can't put them in jail and make them give you access to their stomach. So we developed an artificial stomach. Again, this was something developed in the laboratory, very rudimentary back in the 1970s. And we used it as first a research and development tool and then a quality control tool. R&D to see what happens to these ingredients as you're making the product, part of the commercialization process. And then ultimately quality control that says after I've made these products, how do they respond in the stomach? Or after I've made the products and it's 2 years later, how do they respond in the stomach? Sort of quality control type of thing. So in those particular cases, we embrace that idea. But did you know that today, doing that process is the standard of the industry? If you go to any of the big research organizations or product certification organizations, having an artificial stomach is something that everybody does. They do that sort of testing now because it's important to do. Now, we've known that for 30 or 40 years, but in the last several years, that's been embraced widely. But we've moved on from then and also developed an artificial intestine environment so that we can see the next steps. And eventually, I imagine that the standards from the FDA or the USDA or wherever it might be, USP, will embrace the idea that you should have gastrointestinal modeling as well. Really important. Glycemic response control, I'll touch on these because I'm going to go on too long, I can tell. Glycemic response control, who had heard about glycemic response in 2000? Yet it's on the minds and the news of everybody today. The glycemic index, glycemic load, all of these, you know, and all of that stuff is really cool, but really it comes back to glycemic response. It's not, we can tell you about the glycemic index. We can tell you how much potential carbohydrate is there and the potential for conversion to glucose in your bloodstream. We can tell you about the load, I mean, how much a dose represents, how big that dose of carbohydrate is, and put you in there. But really the value of understanding glycemic effects is to understand how they happen in your body, which is the big advantage of glycemic response control. It understands everything that's going on outside, but it's about managing things that are going on inside. Now, we started doing that, Burke, in the 1990s, launched glycemic response control technology in 2000. And here we are today, nearly 20 years later, and guess what's a hot topic? Glycemic response control. Why? Because it's a fundamental concept that drives diabetes. Now, we'd known that. I remember years ago talking to Dr. Hooper, SAB member Dr. Hooper, a bright guy with a Texas accent, who said one day, you know, John, in the end, it's all going to be about sugar. Okay. I got a little too much Carolina in that accent, but so it is. And same thing with molecular differentiation. Other companies do molecular distillation. That's figuring out one thing and putting it together. We think that's cool. We did that many, many decades ago. But we wanted to be able to identify key nutrients across a broad spectrum and deliver them all. So we do molecular differentiation. Eventually, maybe, it's not easy to do, but eventually you will find others who will try to do something like that or something similar. But by then we will have moved on because we did molecular differentiation a while ago, and though we continue to refine the technology, we are moving on. Big difference. Quickly, proven powerful benefits. I won't take you through all of these, but you know, this is a big difference too. All of the things that you see there on this slide are things that have been not only done by us in our research, but have been done by others. It's powerful in that we have this evidence, but what it means is that unlike the vast majority of companies and people that operate in our marketplace, we have a science-driven foundation that is unassailable. One of the reasons I am so confident, I could be talking to the American Medical Association right now and I would not be giving a different presentation. Why would I need to? I'm so confident about what we do that it's bulletproof. They can't say anything derogatory about our products or our science or what we do. So I'm not going to take you through the story. I'm just going to say, be proud. I'm going to channel Don Lawson for a moment. Aren't you proud of Neolife? Now, we got to this incredible database by looking and working with this group that you see up here. Something I like to say is you can always tell the quality of a company by the quality of the company it keeps. Okay, so we keep some pretty serious company here. I think the important thing to note about this, though, is that all of this was earned. This was not a checkbook adventure. Jerry didn't show up and say, I got $1 million. What are you going to do for me, USDA or CDC or whoever it might be? They probably would have said nothing because the USDA's budget is, you know, pretty serious. And they wouldn't want to lose their jobs by doing that. So the way we got here is we got down in there in the trenches with them and worked on these things with them. We were side by side with these researchers investigating carotenoids. They were coming to us, for example, because we had developed standards of identity for things like zeaxanthin before anybody else had even heard the word. Because we were digging down in nature's blueprint for human nutrition, and we know that people who consumed most of these colorful fruits and vegetables had all these health benefits, so okay, let's find out what they are. Let's identify them. Let's find out ways to standardize them. Let's be able to deliver those, because most people aren't going to get them otherwise. So we earned our right into this group. We didn't walk up to the USDA and write them a check. They came up to us after we made a presentation at the New York Academy of Sciences and said, would you mind if we did some research with your carotenoid complex? And we said, well, maybe. What do you got in mind? And they said, well, you know, carotenoids are so important, we'd like to use your product as a representative standard to feed to people so we can determine the benefits of that so we can make recommendations for food consumption. Oh, so they were going down the path that we had just come up. Right? We had started with the food and got to the carotenoids. They wanted to start with the carotenoids and go back to the food. You don't get there by accident, folks. You get there because you do the work diligently, year after year after year after year, decade after decade. And you end up with these sorts of stories, end up with this sort of power. It means that what we're about is widely embraced in the academic and scientific community. We've earned our position there. We didn't try to buy it. We didn't fake it out. We didn't make our own journal. A lot of companies out there at one time were making their own journals. The journal of Oh My Goodness, right? And I just happen to have a bottle of Oh My Goodness right here for you. That isn't the way we do things. Because it's our family and we're going to do this for our entire lives, right? That resulted in this. Coming out of that, you'd have to do good science to get good science published. Okay, and we got lots of scientific journals published in the most prestigious journals in the world. And the level that we've been accepted at takes us all the way up to our data being referenced in the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the preeminent medical journals in the world. That, JAMA, and a couple of others, maybe the Lancet, sort of set the stage, Nature. But it's just a handful, and you don't get to even operate in that realm up there. You don't even get to be thought about being mentioned in that realm without earning your way. So we've got all of this data, all of this published proof, which to you means you're talking about truth rather than fiction. You're relating people. You know, these can actually benefit you rather than the theoretical benefits that you might get from consuming these things. This is all solidly scientific. Yet, what it really means is that what we represent is an evidence base that is broad and deep, not only what's published, but the people who published it, and not only what the people who published it, how the relationships were built, and not only about how the relationships were built, but how along the path that we've been on, those relationships came to be and continue after decades to be nourished and grown yet today. We don't stop anywhere along the way. You know about our raw material stuff. I won't take you all through it. No, but I can tell you that GMO is a big issue today, right? You know, when it became a big issue for the company was back in the 1980s. No one even really thought about genetic modification back there, or how it would invade the system, how it would put in the environment and its natural species of the planet in jeopardy, how it would be manipulated by giant corporations for the purpose of spraying vast amounts of toxic pesticides on plants. That was the primary motivation, right? I understand the idea of not having to pull the weeds, okay? But I don't know that you need to actually flood the whole environment with something that's toxic to everything around it except the soybean in this case. I don't think that's smart. And so we've been aware of that all the time. We do a great deal of work. You guys have no idea what goes on in the background. If I tried to even go down that path, there'd be people up here pulling me off the stage. But I can tell you that in the background there are hundreds of people in our global supply line out there, hundreds, probably thousands, who go to work every day to fulfill the dictates that we have about what these raw materials we use have got to contain and what they must not contain, what their genetic origin can be and what genetic origin it can't be. And it's well beyond that. The GMO deal is not stationary. The old shotgun approach they used to use is long gone. And they're now using very sophisticated technologies like gene editing and so on. So let me recap here real quick, okay? This is the stuff we got. Unique and exclusive products. No one's got any products like this because no one's been on this journey with us but us. Okay? You don't get to where we are unless you walk the walk, okay? Scientifically proven benefits. There's whole companies out there that could be started and flourished on just one of the things that we've got. Just one bit of evidence. I'd love to have one bit of evidence. But we have a treasure trove of evidence. Okay? Quality without compromise. The quality demands that we put on our products are so elaborate, so strict, that sometimes we find difficulty in finding suppliers that will fulfill our needs. You know, if something goes awry, and we can't put it back on track, we will discontinue that supplier, maybe even discontinue that product. Because we can't compromise on our standards just to make a little money. We would rather lose whatever that money is involved there and get the standards correct, because in the end, it's got to be durable. Okay? Natural source, biocompatible stuff. This idea of whole food, human food chain nutrition, right? That's about biocompatibility. There are a lot of things that are alive on the planet that aren't compatible with our biochemistry. You know, you can get stuff from tree bark or unknown sort of algal materials or whatever and make it look like something and call it natural, but it has no place in human nutrition. And finally, the most important thing, all of this adds up to solutions to modern health challenges. We know what those health challenges are. We know about chronic disease and the epidemic and how we've got to turn that around. Something has got to be done, and it's going to have to be done at our level, because it isn't going to get done top down. It's got to happen bottom up. So in the future, you can figure that we're not going to change the course. We are well down this path. The path ahead of us is clear. There are a lot of branches and alternatives we can take, and we've got groups of people, scientists, and so on and so forth in the SAB and the Global Science Network that are out there already, out in the forefront, checking those paths, going down and looking for the ideas, giving us back information that says, yeah, we should think about this, we should do that, to define the path forward. We are, in our thinking, 5 years or more ahead of where we are talking today, because we have to be there. We have to think on that scale. We can't wait. You don't lead from the back. That's called a sheepdog, okay? You lead from the front. And I think that's the role you guys have to play too. You have to lead from the front, because we've got to end this trend. And the only way we're going to end this trend is if we lead people to the conclusion. We lead them to the right spot. We do that a couple of ways. One, we talk to them and help them and share with them and guide them and so on and so forth. But in the end, we empower them with knowledge, and we empower them with tools as how to use those tools and that knowledge to empower themselves and everyone around them. And only that way will we ever end the trend. Thank you very much.